I know I find it a great pleasure to get out there and interact with people. Always better to be in person, but great to do it over the new technology that we've developed. It's been an incredible journey, one that I continue to have gratitude of. I deeply believe in this project, and it started very simply with a few engineers here in Augusta sitting around a table and thinking about how we can get new forms of clean energy into the New England grid, and in this case, particularly in Maine. And that started all the way back in 2011. We began sketching out ideas in 2013. We started to buy the land in order to build the project, studied all the permitting. We won the bid and began that process in 2017, which culminated in all of our permits being received in January and the beginning of construction. So what I'm going to do is I have a few slides to go over quickly. I think we have a nice small group. My preference is to have much more dialogue. There's tons of misinformation about the project, and it's always been my goal to be open, transparent, and honest about everything. So I'd love to get into that discussion. So with that, I'm going to bring up the deck. So just starting off, what is this project all about? I had mentioned that this was a project that has been under development for a long time. It takes a lot of time and money to get these projects developed. And as an investor, as somebody coming in looking to try to do something that we really believe in, it takes time. But as I said, all the permits have now been received. In January, we started construction. We have about 540 or so people working on the project. 3 out of every 4 is a Mainer. All of them are happy to be on the project. They're worried about what could happen in the future as we face the referendum, and we'll come back around to that in a minute. It is a 145-mile transmission line. It goes from the Quebec border down to about the Forks, where it goes directly south to Lewiston, Maine. The reason this is a direct current line as opposed to an alternating current line is it's required because Quebec and the US don't have the ability to connect their systems without some kind of a clutch that goes between them. So we have one conversion from AC to DC in the heart of Quebec, and then that line comes all the way down to Lewiston, where the power is deposited in the New England grid right here in Maine, not an extension cord to Boston, as many of the opposition will say. The 2/3 of the corridor runs along existing line, and you could see that in the existing map here, the orange DC line. The solid part of it that goes from Lewiston north to the Forks, that's all along an existing corridor. So there's a transmission line that's been there for decades that all of Maine has relied on. What we're doing is adding in that part of the corridor 75 feet and putting our monopole, single pole structures for the DC line in. And then as far as it goes to the new part, we studied back in the 2011 time all of the significant environmental features, all the area where tourism focuses, prime areas that we knew that we needed to avoid. And when we did that analysis, the best way to get from that existing border to the Quebec border was along area that is commercially logged for generations. We essentially had 2 major companies, the old Plum Creek, Weyerhaeuser, and AC Carrier at the border were our negotiation partners for that new part of the corridor. But with that third-party negotiation, with the arm's length negotiation that we had with them, we eventually came up with a deal and put the entire corridor together that we then have been developing. The other aspect of this project, a lot of people will say, well, there's no benefit in this for no power here for Maine. Again, the power gets delivered right here to Lewiston. We'll talk a little bit about more what that means for the whole region. But Maine itself is getting 500,000 megawatt hours, which is enough for about 70,000 homes here in the state at a price that's guaranteed to be below $4 below the market price. So even Maine is getting a significant amount of energy directly from this corridor. All right. From an environmental perspective, once this project is online, what will happen is this power gets deposited to Lewiston. It will be one of the first chunks of power that will be dispatched here to meet all of our energy needs. And what that means is that amount of energy, which is about 2 nuclear power plants in size, that amount of energy will displace most more expensive oil and natural gas, but also that oil and natural gas is the generation that contains the largest amount of carbon in the supply mix. So by avoiding that, by displacing that with clean hydro, not only will prices drop around the whole region, but also the carbon emissions that go with that will be avoided. And that was estimated in the regulatory process at 3 million metric tons of those dirty emissions every year, which is equivalent to taking off about 700,000 cars off the road, which is virtually every car in Maine that is on the road. The project also has the benefit because, and we can see that back up on this part of the map, there are 2 other areas where we're reinforcing the system just south of Lewiston. It's this kind of blue line there. And then there's a new line in existing corridor from Wiscasset to Windsor. And that provides a substantial amount of upgrades to the existing system that benefit the whole state and the region from a reliability perspective, but even more importantly, gives the opportunity for other renewable energies to connect into the grid. Essentially, more headroom now would exist after this project is built than existed prior. In addition, this was again a 3.5-year process in our regulatory proceeding. The project improved during that period of time, both in public comments, our outreach to the communities to make the project better, but also requirements that were placed by the Department of Environmental Protection. One of those is to permanently conserve 40,000 acres in Western Maine. That's a process that we're underway now. Just to give you an idea of scale, we're impacting about 1,000 acres with this project. Obviously, in your region, you're well familiar with the logging industry. We tend to cut about 400,000 acres every year. This is about 1,000 acres. We're required to conserve, again, 40,000 acres in Western Maine. Also, there were a lot of changes made in the project and a lot of conservation related to wildlife species. More than 700 acres of deer winning habitat has been preserved. Travel corridors all along the transmission line in areas that were thought to be the more sensitive areas. And then there's about 14 miles of this that have special treatment in order to allow full canopy height of trees in areas where there were species or special protections that the department wanted to place. So a lot of changes that were made in the project to improve it. Another one, a big one that was a concern early on was the line originally was going to go over the Kennebec River, and it's now going under. This new part of the corridor, the cleared corridor, is 54 feet. It was originally proposed to be 150, but what we're doing is what's called tapered vegetation. So we're tapering vegetation once we get past that middle 54, that will be the cleared corridor, which also, of course, will be the area that we're going to have snowmobile traffic, trails, hunting opportunities for tourism. As far as what this means for the economy, there will be it's $1 billion investment here in the state. There will be a $500 million increase in the GDP here in the state. This was an analysis done by the University of Southern Maine. Again, all of these numbers came from the University of Southern Maine as part of the regulatory proceeding. The project creates 1,600 jobs on average over the construction period, both direct and indirect. And 3 out of 4 of every one of those jobs so far has gone to a Mainer. As I mentioned, the bringing that clean energy into Lewiston reduces energy prices because the most expensive generation is dispatched off. This was a conversation I've had with some other people in the county. Obviously, we recognize that your direct connections are both north and east. But what economically will happen, even for the area of Canada, there will be less power that will be flowing into the U.S. as a result of all this new clean energy coming into Maine. And we estimate that amount of energy coming in from Canada, less energy, will be about 60% of the load that your region has from that part of the area. So even though the 14 to 44 million was measured based on the main grid that's there will be benefits not only to the province, to Canada, but also to northern Maine too. And then we have negotiated a number of other packages, actually in excess of $250 million. Amongst them are included broadband, heat pump programs, electric vehicle programs, and $140 million in rate relief. And one of the things we made a decision early on in talking with the communities that we're going to be building this line in is the real dire need for broadband. And that, I think, was highlighted again in the context of COVID, where people were really disconnected and their families were locked down, that they didn't have access to school, and how important broadband became. So we designed the line just to have a few fiber strands that we would need in order to operate the line. But in talking with the community, we really loaded up the amount of fiber on those poles. We made a commitment to all along the roads where this line will go to make access points for further build out. And then, as said here, additional monies that can then take that fiber directly out to the communities that we serve. The project, as I said, all the permits are done. We've made it through the number of legislative sessions where this was a key area of topic. But now the project, after all the permitting, all the requirements that we've already met, is going to face the referendum. I've put the language here so that you can take a look at it if you haven't already seen it. But I really want to point you to three things that I think are incredibly concerning. And I think even for people that may not love every aspect of this project, I think the idea of retroactivity and the idea that either the people or the government through the legislative authority can go back in time and change rules and laws to harm other parties. And I think that's I believe a concern that I hear from many people when I'm talking. So what does it do? It retroactively requires 2/3 legislative approval for leases of public land. I think anytime it makes sense that the state reevaluates how it's using its public lands. The piece that's actually at stake in our case is a 3-by-1 mile piece that already has a transmission line already on it. So the standard is a substantial alteration. What this referendum will do, the Bureau gave that lease to us back in 2014 after they evaluated it. This would go back retroactively and change that. In addition, it retroactively bans construction in the Upper Kennebec region for what they call high impact transmission, and also retroactively requires legislative approval of construction of any what they call high impact transmission line, which essentially is any transmission over a certain level of voltage. Our concern, and I think anybody that lives in the state has to think about what does it mean for an investor if you buy some land, if you develop it, if you follow all the rules, you meet all the permitting requirements, you get the approval, you begin construction. You can think about it as a home or a business here in the state. What happens if we go back and change those rules? And I think it's for Maine, it's a terrible precedent. I think that people and businesses could be penalized for things that have happened in the past before the new laws were put in place. And from our view, that's going to potentially have major effect on tourism, manufacturing, renewable energy, small businesses, at a time when I think there are real opportunities with the expansion of broadband, with the improvement of transportation, for people that are looking for a beautiful place to live, like Maine. I think those kind of signals create a major red flag for people. And as it says here, sends a clear message to the people looking to invest in Maine, that we're closed for business. So I've covered a lot of information. There are still a lot more details on the project, but rather than me talking more about that, I'd really prefer to turn it over to you to ask questions, and I will give you the permission. I have thick skin after all these years of not necessarily the things I learned in engineering school, but I'm happy to take your questions and answer any concerns you have.
Great, thank you, Thor. Let's kick things off with Paul Toll, the president and CEO of the Heuristic Partnership. I know he has a few questions for you, so Paul.
Sure. Thanks, Thorne. It's interesting presentation. I think most of us that are in this business or are concerned about this are well aware of the points you've made there. And I think also probably everyone on this call is an advocate for clean energy and doing as much as we can right here in Maine to impact our GDP. One of my concerns is that, and I've heard varying answers to this, so I want to get sort of your latest take on this. We hope one of the best places to site renewable energy in Maine is in Aroostook County. We've got abundant wind up here in the winter. If you've never been up here, we've got as much sun as anybody else. So we're trying to do a lot of development. You might be familiar with LD 1710 that just passed with the northern renewable corridor that we hope to build out and therefore open it up to all sorts of renewable generation from the north. We believe Aroostook County is well positioned to take advantage of that. So my concern would be, there is a question somewhere in here. My concern would be, in what ways might your project impact the ability through choking out the ability to generate from northern Maine? I mean, how far down would we need to build a generation line to pump renewable energy out of northern Maine if you connect in the Lewiston, Sarawak region, a 1,000 megawatt project?
Sure. No, it's a great question. I had talked, maybe I'll start this way by when I talked about the fact that a few engineers sat around at a table sketching out ideas about bringing renewable energy into the region. One of those ideas was, and of course at that time there was also a dialogue about the pros and cons associated with you guys getting connected into the New England grid, and is there some moratorium on transmission costs? All those dialogues were going on about, is there more benefit to your region of even connecting, even without renewable energy? But also, obviously, we were talking with all different kinds of suppliers who saw that area in the same way that you did. EDP being one of the big partners that we work with. So one of those ideas was, developing a corridor from Pittsfield essentially up to your region, to give that opportunity for people that did want to see that kind of development. And so we worked again, starting probably in that same period of time, maybe a little bit later, 2013 or 14, working with the then Emera Maine to develop a corridor that we believe could work to access that region and connect it. And if you remember, we bid a project. It was a request for proposal prior to the Massachusetts bid that we won this project on, and we love that project. It was called the Maine Renewable Energy Interconnect. It had a mix of partners on the wind side, and then us, and at the time Emera Maine, that bid it. In the end, we weren't selected. I still believe it was one of the best projects that's there. And the challenge really was the independent system operator believed there were additional transmission requirements that were needed north of our project. They weren't related to the New Hampshire border, or any of the interconnections that were there. So that's a project that we're very looking forward to showing you and the evaluators of that idea as it moves forward. Our corridor, we think it's going to be the best one. We think that we know how to efficiently and effectively build and price transmission. So that's something we believe in. And I'm also really proud of the partnerships that our little business development team developed with all the different wind developers in the region to come up with a good solution to allow them to compete. Now, as far as the impacts of this project obviously is connecting in Lewiston. The line from Windsor to Wiscasset, and I mentioned this at a very high level, that we're investing $200 million in the existing transmission system. And the reason for that is the standards that Massachusetts included in the request for bid were so high that there was substantially more transmission that was invested that would have been required for a normal type of interconnection for a generator. So that existing headroom now exists for that ability for the Maine renewable energy a project or another project like it to bring that renewable energy down the grid. One of the areas that the opponents have argued, including Nextera and Calpine, people that see our project as a competitor to their bottom line, which is why they're investing so much money in to oppose the project, really funded the whole referendum campaign, all of the advertising hit pieces that you see on the project. But they argued that the New England, New Hampshire, Maine interface was going to be too constrained with all this energy coming down. But in reality, what happens is it is displacing some generation in Maine. It's also displacing some of the energy that would be coming into New England from Canada. And as a result, all that 1,200 megawatts doesn't have to go south, but the part of it that does has only a marginal effect on the overall congestion associated with it. About 1 or 2% of the hours in every year, there may be some minor congestion. Those arguments were really dismissed by the Public Utility Commission in Maine that looked at that. So, I see the risks associated with your development much more tied to the outcome of our project. If this project doesn't go forward and it's because of a referendum, I think that, and there is a blueprint that now exists for Calpine, for Nextera, other generators that don't want to see that project happen to follow. They say, well, if we pay this amount of money, we'll be able to get it on the referendum. If we get it on the referendum and use these manipulation or influence strategies, we're going to be able to kill this project. So I think from my perspective, the concerns about that ability to bring renewable energy down have been already settled in the PUC process. But I think the bigger risks are seeing a project like this that's already made it through all these challenges get disrupted.
That's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I probably talked too much. I probably should have done it in smaller pieces, but feel free to ask follow-up.
So specifically, I see Amy Kurtz on the line from EDP here, and maybe she could chime in as well. I mean, she's been a part of this LD 1710 since its inception. So if Amy, if you want to weigh in and if you're comfortable with the project that Thorne's talking about here, that it doesn't have any adverse impacts on what we're trying to achieve through 1710, please share your thoughts on that, because that's really what I'm trying to get to. Is there some creation of a hurdle for Northern Maine to participate in renewable generation and transmission because of your project?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I mean, I see them as two very separate projects. I don't think that the creation or the construction of the New England Clean Energy Connect negatively impacts what many of us are trying to do in Aroostook County, and hopefully what Thorne and his team will participate in as a result of 1710. I think the bigger challenge is the referendum. I don't know. I think I'm not a lawyer and I don't want to pretend to be one in this case, but that language is a little scary. You know, you don't really know how a judge or an attorney is going to interpret that. And if it could mean that whatever transmission line that results from LD 1710 would then have to get another vote. I would hope not, because the legislature already voted to support 1710. So I would hope that that would be enough, but I'm sure that there's somebody out there that would argue otherwise. And, you know, any kind of, and Thorne, I think, said it really well. And this just creates a lot of uncertainty, and uncertainty is the enemy of big, bold economic development projects, including transmission lines, including wind farms, including solar parks. And this is just an unfortunate creation of more risk and uncertainty around the results of these big projects. So the referendum language is scary to me, but I'm hopeful that because of all of the support and all of the benefits that that renewable energy in Aroostook County would bring to Maine, you know, it's a different project. I think all transmission is difficult to build, but I'm hopeful that this project would be able to overcome whatever challenge, you know, that the LD17 projects would be able to overcome whatever challenges may result from the referendum language.
Thanks for weighing in, Amy, and I agree. We don't want to set a precedent here that gives off the perception that we're going to fight it through regulation no matter what you try to build or develop in Maine. That's a terrible situation to be in. So,
you know, and I would just add, I 100% agree with everything that Amy said, and I think the only thing I would just say is that yes, there's a concern about. I would be very concerned in trying to develop that solar and wind about this referendum language. But let's say that somehow there's a workaround that happens. The idea, I mean, this is our second referendum battle. You know, the NextEra paid for the first one, that was unconstitutional. They paid for the second one. Their revenues, you know, it's about, we've heard the fossil fuel generation brag about the fact that every day they delay this project, it means $3 million that they save in their revenues. Now, those revenues are energy prices that everybody else is paying. But $3 million a day, you're willing to throw a lot of money at a project, either delay it or kill it. So even if there's a way forward, even if this referendum were passed for your area, I don't think you should rest comfortably that NextEra or another generator, fossil fuel generator that's trying to fight this isn't going to run another campaign in order to try to kill the next project or the next idea, because they've done it around the country. And I really think this is an opportunity for Mainers to speak and say, we're not going to allow people to dictate what happens here in our state.
And just one more here, and then I want other people to weigh in, obviously. There's an ongoing debate about, you know, are you just sort of, is this kind of a shell game? If you're trying to reduce carbon in the project, what is the capacity that the dams or the reservoirs have in Hydro-Quebec's assets that ensure that this is just, it's existing energy that isn't being utilized now? They're having to release it without spinning turbines. And now they just, instead of releasing that water, they can generate it. They've got a market for it. So you're truly reducing carbon at that, I don't know what the number you gave, 9 million tons or something. Is that documented, and is it real, or is it just shifting it around? Is it taking that renewable energy that's already being produced from Hydro-Quebec's reservoirs and moving it to Massachusetts, and then firing coal plants or gas plants somewhere else to accommodate?
No, it's a great question. You know, I got to give credit to the opposition. They've done a good job on this area. This was in the Maine Public Utility Commission. There was a whole part of the hearing specifically on this issue. You know, this idea of greenwashing, this idea of like, well, you're just replacing here. And the Public Utility Commission evaluated this. They listened to both sides and they dismissed the opposition. They said, no, this project will regionally reduce carbon emissions. Now, the things that got talked about in that proceeding was looking at how much capacity Hydro-Quebec has added over the last 15 years. So, this project is 1,200 megawatts, but they've added 5,000 megawatts over the last 15 years. Now that plan, if you go and the opposition tried to find weaknesses in the strategic plan of Hydro-Quebec. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of pages of documents that were part of this record, but the Hydro-Quebec expected the ability to build new transmission to move that incredibly valuable reservoir, clean energy throughout the region. They were unsuccessful. So what you see over the last 5 to 7 years is an increase in the increase in the reservoirs as they added more, but the percent of how full those reservoirs just continued to increase. And to the point where in 2018, they actually spilled water, not just from an operations perspective, but because they couldn't get that water through the turbines to create electricity to bring it to other markets. And that amount that they spilled was larger than the amount of energy that would have been delivered to Maine. So in that year, if the project existed, all you would have done is not spill the water. You would have turned it through the turbines, delivered it to Lewiston, Maine, and had a reduction in energy prices and reduction in carbon. Now, what happens in the future is always a complicated question. And there are two 15-year models that were developed, one by a company called Daymark and another called London Economics, that evaluated these same criteria and came to the conclusion that 3 to 3.6 million metric tons was correct. And that was ultimately the conclusion of the commission. So they argued that this idea of greenwashing wasn't fundamental, that there will be meaningful and substantial reductions in carbon. And just to give you another way, we say 700,000 vehicles off the road. Another way to look at it is, how big of a forest, the new forest, would you need that has that sequestration ability that matches how much carbon this project will pull out of the atmosphere? And it's a forest that's about 75% of the size of Vermont. So that's how meaningful this is from an environmental perspective, and there really is a split in the environmental community on this issue. So you have groups like the Conservation Law Foundation, the Acadia Center, Union for Concerned Scientists. All of those groups have said, look, this project will reduce carbon emissions. And that is actually, if you read the DEP's order, they talk about minimizing all the impacts that this 1,000 acres will have. But their biggest warning is the largest risk to northern Maine woods is climate change.
Okay, thanks.
Do we have any other questions from the audience today?
Thorne, this is Don Tardy. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you great. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that great presentation, and certainly enlightened me to the complexity of the issues that we are facing in this referendum. And frankly, I was leaning the opposite way until I saw this presentation and the precedent it could be setting, which would be very, very detrimental to investors in Maine in the future. My question is specific to the reliability of energy supply from Quebec. And there are times that Quebec has been generating supply of energy for other players in New England. But when there's severe weather conditions, they tend to keep their electrons at home. And it creates problems with reliability in the region where fossil fuels and everything else has to pick up production to be able to meet the energy demands of that region. And so what are we talking about here by way of reliability of supply as it relates to those severe weather conditions coming forward in the future from Quebec?
It's a great question. And I think certainly I would, I don't know every contractual obligation Hydro-Quebec has with each of the adjacent communities that are part of their piece. But that same concern that you had about them keeping their electrons at home was a very big concern in Massachusetts. So if you were to look at the purchase power agreement, there are substantial liquidated damages for every hour that they can't deliver power. And those substantial liquidated damages are gonna make sure that the prioritization is on this project. So, I don't remember right off the top of my head, but I said in those negotiations, we were negotiating both the transmission agreement and the purchase power agreement. And I know that Hydro-Quebec had to spend a lot of time making sure that whatever happened, that they could deliver to Lewiston. So I think that aspect of it is covered by those substantial liquidated damages. If you read the Massachusetts RFP, it's specifically focused on the winter period, and that's the period of time where Hydro-Quebec is, dealing with all their heating load that they have in Quebec. Massachusetts wanted to make sure there was enough power that was there that they would commit to delivering it at that period of time. Now, when we're talking about, I'll assume I answered that, but I'll tell you a little bit more about this project and how it affects reliability. It's a little bit more inside baseball, but if you look at some of the things that are happening in California, if you look at what happened in Texas, you have situations in California where they're really starting the intermittent generation is becoming a bigger and bigger piece of their supply portfolio. And at times they're either having too much generation or not enough. And the amazing thing about this project, although it's designed right now to deliver power one direction, if a California problem start happening here in New England, this line is designed to go both directions. So if Hydro-Quebec is paid to act like a battery for the whole Northeast region, which they have the ability with those reservoirs, they will renegotiate that contract, and we could take the energy that we have that's surplus at times and deliver it and store it up in the reservoirs for a time that we can be withdrawn. So that high voltage connection and this what's called HVDC, high voltage direct current, and those two converter stations are also incredibly powerful for helping a system heal. And also, if there ever is, God forbid, a blackout, these kind of systems help restore power better. The last piece of it, which is one of my favorite parts of the project, is, as I think sounds like you know the energy industry well, there are periods of time where the gas pipelines that come from Pennsylvania, where the cheap gas is stored, can't get that gas up to New England. And when that happens, that constrained prices makes gas prices go very high, but it also makes electric prices go very high. And there was an example back in 2014 where 13-14 winter, where it was a 10-day cold snap. And because the gas system got constrained, the regional electric prices went up by $3 billion for that 10-day period. Maine's piece of that was about $300 million. Now, what the reason for that is because not only the heating and industrial processes, but all the generators in New England that are gas that are needing to run during that cold time. So with this project, you now have 1,200 megawatts that's going to be dispatched first. You're going to displace oil and natural gas. And that natural gas that used to be a demand in New England goes away. And you've created now more headroom on the natural gas pipeline. So you could almost argue that this project is a virtual natural gas pipeline that gives even more reliability. And that was, if you read the PUC executive summary, or even their press release, you will see that dialogue in there where they say this project will create more fuel diversity that allows us to withstand more volatility out there in the world.
Now, taking the example of Massachusetts and how they're protecting themselves in this transaction and bringing it to Maine, is the energy that you're going to be delivering to Maine displacing base loadable generation?
No, the nuclear, it won't displace. The most efficient natural gas isn't likely going to be impacted. What you're going to be doing is really displacing oil and the less competitive natural gas. Now, if I allow me to jump one bit over, well, maybe 2 points. One is that one of the opposition's continued things is that talk about impact on Maine renewable, the impact on biomass here of generation in the state. That again was argued at the PUC, and there's a paragraph in there that you can read that the PUC basically dismisses those arguments and say that there's no evidence that there's negative effect of our project and any of the existing generation that's out there. But even though the generation, let's say a nuclear plant like Seabrook and NextEra that NextEra owns, their revenues are going to drop because the wholesale electric price is going to drop all throughout the region. And that lower price means that NextEra is going to get less revenue, even though that nuclear plant will still be running. They'll get less dollars for every unit they sell. And that's why they're pouring so much money in to try to prevent the competition that will happen and to prevent the loss of their own profits.
But is Maine going to be protected like Massachusetts in this whole transaction? I mean, we don't have the legal, well, for want of a better term, legal guidelines or protections that Massachusetts had. Aren't we a little at risk compared to them? So this is I'll take a first attempt at this from a power perspective. The direct current is we tell the power where to go. So we tell the power to go from this station down to Lewiston. Once that power is in Lewiston, it serves the whole New England grid. The electrons that are there do not know that there's a contract that exists, a big contract between Hydro-Quebec and Massachusetts. That power is going to flow exactly where it's needed. It's like a rock in a pond. The waves are just going to go. So the fact that those liquidated damages, as I mentioned, are in the purchase power agreement is guarantee the power is coming to Lewiston. Has nothing to do with the ability to get to Massachusetts. So that control in that agreement is actually also guaranteeing that power gets deposited. Now, for the other piece I talked about that's going for Maine, that 500,000 megawatt hours, there's actually a condition in there that says if something happens with that agreement, it doesn't work out or there's not deliveries on it, the below market value of that power, which is about, I think it's about $40 million over the 20-year part of the agreement, will be guaranteed to flow to Maine. So there's a guarantee in that agreement that the benefit, the economic benefit of that power will still be delivered. Thank you. That clarifies it very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Great questions.
Thank you.
Have any other questions for Thorne? Jerry, Bob, you want to wrap us up?
Sure. I want to thank you again, Thorne, for taking the time to present to the group. I hope everyone has a better understanding of the project and some of the consequences of what the referendum could do. So thank you again. And thank you everyone for joining us, and hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.